everyone, welcome to part 2 of our Level Up Roundtable on Progression, featuring audience Q&A with our panelists from Sonic Speed Simulator, Phantom Forces, and Dragon Blade. Here's our first question.
Well, we've been talking for a while here. We definitely have a pile of really good Q&A questions for you guys from the audience. So I'm going to toss it over to Erin. Erin, do you want to ask away?
Absolutely. We have a lot of great questions here. So first one, how do you balance progression so it's not too fast for paying players and not too slow for free-to-play players?
Well, I'll tell you that in Sonic Speed Simulator, we really designed the game for free-to-play players. You know, that's who 98% of the audience is going to be. And so then we offer abilities to pay if you want to get to things sooner, because you either don't have the time to spend or you want things very impulsively, which is something that is, you know, you're right as a gamer who just want the things. And so that's how we think about it. If the game isn't designed for the free player at its heart, you won't have the ability to commercialize the game in a meaningful way anyways. And I think that really goes back to that fundamentals of the free-to-play business, right? Which is acquisition, retention, monetization, right? You have to first get players into the game. You have to then get players to want to continue to play your game, become dedicated community members. And only then can you really think on how to monetize players. And I think, you know, I know there's some people on the Roblox side here who have worked on some pretty huge free-to-play games we were discussing earlier. I'm sure that'll sound very familiar to anyone who's worked in the free-to-play businesses. You know, acquisition, retention, monetization is kind of the gospel there. So that's how we think about it across all of our games at GameFam. I think a lot of Roblox developers think about it the same way, though, because I think Roblox developers generally aren't free-to-play monetization experts. And so, but they are gameplay experts. And so to that point, you're always designing, you know, and I say this for our designers at GameFam, because we have a lot of designers working across a number of games. They're always thinking about gameplay. And we always tell them, focus on gameplay, focus on fun, focus on engagement, focus on long-term progression and reasons to play this game for years. And then let's figure out how to make sure the game is commercially successful.
Awesome. Anybody else want to tackle that one?
I can try to take a stab at this. So balance is a constant challenge that Phantom Forces faces. Our basic leveling system it's almost exponential. So you level up very quickly from like the first 50 levels. And so new players, they can immediately unlock over 50 weapons and play around with that. And those are very solid guns. And some of them are very iconic, like the AK-47 or like the M4s, guns that if you know anything about them, you'll probably recognize right away. If you play Call of Duty, you'll immediately know them. And so the incentive for the paying players is that we have very unique weapons in the higher levels that are not necessarily meta being like they're very strong and probably the best in the game. Instead, we have like a gun example is the G11. It's sort of this very prototypey German, it looks like a space gun, that's what people call it. And what this is, it's more like a symbol. So people that chase after the high ranking guns, they do it because this gun holds a special cultural meaning, or it's like very unusual and you want to use it to show it off kind of thing. So it's almost like a fashion statement that you're making by using this gun. And that's how we sort of balance our weapons around high levels and low levels. And the way you can spend credits on our game is that we take the difference between your current level and the unlock level of that gun. So if you're rank 100 and the gun costs rank 150, then we take that level 50 difference and then apply a formula, and that's your price. If you are rank 149 and you're trying to buy the same 150 gun, well, the price is much shorter. There's only like one level difference, and you apply that formula. It's basically almost free at that point, so you can just buy it. So this incentivizes playing the game long term, so you can be entirely free to play and unlock most of your stuff. In fact, every time you rank up, you actually get a bit of credits, so you can actually unlock guns pass your level for free because you always get a bit of currency just from playing the game. It's more of oh, you want this specific gun that's 50 levels away and you know exactly which one you want. You can just buy that exact one and then play it and then unlock the rest of the 40 guns along the way as you're leveling up over time.
All right. Moving on to question 2. There are different types of game progression. In each of your opinions, what type of progression do you think is the most important for a game to have and why?
I think, I guess it's mostly for me, anyways, about knowing your audience and knowing the genre you're in. I think some types of progression work better, like on a PvP game than say a role playing game. So it's really hard for me to say like this system, like a leveling up system, would work absolutely for every genre. So I don't think that's true. So I guess I'm gonna give a non-answer and say that it really just depends on the audience, the gamer types that you're going for, and what your core mechanics are.
Yeah, I agree that making a generalization across all genres is not very practical. Um, but I guess you always want to have some content that's not available to the player at the start of the game because that always gives them the reason to play the game and then unlock them. So that's maybe a common theme, whether you implement that through a leveling system or a tech tree system or just a very open-ended sort of you get it in some way by completing some challenge. It's all up in the air, but you don't want to give the player everything because then they'll be very bored when they have everything.
Maybe the importance comes from what problem you're trying to solve for your players at the time, if they need more short-term goals or long-term goals, things like that.
Yeah, I think like it's just that, it's goals. Like it's setting goals and goals that resonate with the audience that you're building for. I think that really would, you should build your progression systems around that.
Great, thanks guys. So this one is for Joe. When a brand approaches you, what do you consider when planning an experience?
I think that what we've found is that, we look at the brand and we look at what the brand has to offer to the Roblox gameplay community or experience community, right? And I think what we've found is that a lot of brands think they want to have a Roblox experience, but what they really want is to be part of the Roblox community. And so what we do is because a lot of us on the executive side have worked inside of big brands, we know exactly, kind of the discussions and the thinking processes that the brand managers and brand strategists have. And so what we try to do is we try to get them to, tell us a bit more about what they're trying to accomplish. And the thing that is unique about GameFam, right, is we have 10, 15 top games that we're running. And so we can look at ways to incorporate those brands into our games, or we can look at ways to build unique experiences for those brands. And it really trying to get the brand to tell us more about what would be a successful integration into the Roblox platform for them is the thing that is most important to us. Because when we think about brands, what we want to do is we want to deliver value. We want to deliver value to the brands, and we need to deliver value to our Roblox gamer community and Roblox, social community, because otherwise the brands won't get value. So we're always looking at how to make those things link up together in a way that can deliver successful and measurable results for these brand partners.
Super, thank you, Joe. All right, how can you introduce new progression mechanics without making it too overwhelming for players?
I would say you gate those progression mechanics until later, right? You just don't offer it all at once. Depending on the game, you might have it available if the player discovers it on their own. But as far as like the critical path of where you take them, I would say, you wait until, a certain level or something before you put a focus on that progression system that you're introducing.
All right, so you don't have to have everything available all at once.
Yeah, that, or maybe I was gonna say that messaging it to players too, not just on like Roblox, but off platform. I've seen a lot of games with like a season pass system and their games didn't have one before, so they had to find a way to integrate it. And I think as long as you kind of tutorialize that, make sure the players understand like what it is and how it works, I think you can add progression systems even if it isn't there available at launch.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think live ops are a great way to ease people into new systems that you add, like be it events or certain timed features that give extra benefit if you use them, that kind of stuff.
Awesome. Well, this next one kind of ties into that. So at what point in a project's development do you start to think about progression systems?
For me, it's always the very beginning. You should be thinking about it as data comes in and players are responding to the game. It's pretty obvious, like when you're having shortcomings in like the short-term goals or the midterm or long-term, and then figuring out like how you could best kind of support those and add new features built around those.
For
But
me,
always-
as a solo developer, I play a lot with different prototypes, and I don't really think about long term until I find something that I like playing with as a toy. To echo what Joe was saying initially, once that toy is fun, that's when I start thinking, okay, how can I make this into a full-on experience with certain progression and stuff like that. But I don't really think about that until I'm happy with the very tight controls and that core loop.
I think that's a really good point of view, and I think that gels really well with what many of us from the kind of, gaming industry, quote unquote, know as the best practices for game development, right? Which is you need something fun. All the progression in the world isn't going to matter if it's not fun to hold the game in your hands. So I think where Derek, kind of historically comes into Game Fam projects is we already kind of have a thesis on how the game will feel in a lot of ways. That was certainly the case with Sonic Speed Simulator. We knew within a few weeks of developing that game that we had running and traversal feeling amazing because we had brought in people who had been experimenting with making things feel like Sonic on Roblox for years. And we had Sega with 30 years of experience making Sonic fun to move around in environments. So we had a lot of inherent advantage there. And then Derek came in really specifically focused on progression. But I agree completely that, there's in some ways, there's no point to thinking about progression when you're first starting a game if the game isn't fun to hold in your hands either. So that's a really important point that you made there.
Yeah, and the good thing is that pretty fast. Like you mentioned, in a matter of weeks, you will know whether your initial approach is good or not. So it's relatively cheap and should be done initially before you even build upon that. That would be my advice.
I have some input on this. So one of the interesting perspectives I come from is we have a game in a very saturated market. There are millions of first-person shooters, and they all have their own progression system. There are benefits to this, and there are some cons. The benefit is you get to see what everyone has already done. So the solutions base is very massive. It's already out there. The con is, well, if you try to copy them, then you're not very original. So there's some challenge to find something that's innovative, but still works. And so we get to sort of cherry pick, like, okay, I like playing a game like Modern Warfare, and then here's a game like Overwatch. They have very different progression systems. How can I blend this together to create something that's more unique? I also play games like World of Warships or World of Tanks. They have a tech tree system. So as I'm designing my new game, which is based around building like your own gun with parts, maybe we can try to apply a tech tree system where you unlock parts, and there's like a timeline where you have earlier weapons and then you unlock later weapons. It's almost like a research tree. And then you can combine those attachment parts to build your sort of prototype looking gun. So we just get ideas from a lot of games that have progression, and we focus mostly on the customization part, and that helps us focus, okay, what do we want players to unlock? And it's very clearly it's the weapon parts and weapons in general.
All right, so kind of in similar vein as well. are all players motivated by some kind of progression? And if not, how do you go about designing and monetizing for those players?
Well, yes, absolutely. Different players have different drives of motivation. For example, in my game, some are all about the horses. They just want to collect horses, and that's the only thing they want to do. They couldn't care less about anything else. So I think in my case, I tied everything to one progression system. So everybody has to kind of interact with that to get to their own goals, which are the motivators for interacting with that. But I would say, give them the option as far as like fulfilling themselves in a way that gels with the game, but lets them choose what kind of player they want to be, right? Obviously, this goes only to a certain degree because in my game, it's purely PvE, right? So anybody with that drive, the competitive drive, wouldn't find much beyond, maybe the first playthrough, and then they would be done, right? But that's okay. That's not really the game for them.
So I think I have a slightly different take on progression. I think progression is more of a side piece where the focus is ensuring that your core loop and your gun mechanics, at least for our game, very competitive game, is very good. So we focus more on animations, our camera, feel. It's all about the visuals. And once you are hooked into that core loop, the progression is more of this layer around the core loop that rewards you for continuing to play the game. So not just doing it for the sake of doing it. It's like, okay, you really enjoy this game and you stuck with it despite there's like no tutorial systems. You're just kind of thrown into it. Now here are some goodies that you get. Here's like a shiny new gun that you can play around with because you stuck with our game for so long. So it's more of a way to like reward players rather than to get them into the game in the first place.
I mean, I think when you're talking about shooters in general and a lot of PvP games, it's really more of an emergent progression system. You're not playing the game to get somewhere. You're playing the game to get good. And then you want to make getting good tangibly exciting through rewards. And so in that way, players, are opting in to a dialogue with the progression system versus a simulator where the game is the progression system itself. So they're really on opposite ends of the spectrum. If that's helpful for people, listening here, is how I think about it as a designer. I think about a PvP game like a shooter being on the opposite end of the progression spectrum from a simulator, which is the rawest, most kind of progression driven genre on the platform. I don't know if anyone else agrees with that, but that's how I feel about it.
I think that is perfectly what explains our differences per best fit. So I agree 100%.
Right. Well, here's a fun one. What is your favorite game and how does it inspire you?
Well, mine should be really easy and really clear. It's Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and it inspired almost every part of my game.
That is a very strong answer. The game is a masterpiece.
It's hard for me to pick just one. I grew up with a lot of like 90s games, so like I grew up with this kind of skill level to level progression systems, and just how they handle that in their approach, just masterfully designing levels. That's a pretty big foundation for me. And like even Pokemon Red and Blue, it's those are big driver.
I think it's hard to pick a favorite, really, but I mean, because different games inspire me in so many different ways, and but I think the game that probably had the biggest impact on me, because I really came from more of a brand and IP design background and less of a pure game design background, and really grew up more as an animation and anime super fan than a gaming super fan. I think Journey really changed the entire way I thought about video games in a lot of ways, and what a video game could really be and how a video game could make you feel. And so if I have to pick one, I think I still come back to Journey, and because it delivered on so many levels. Actually, I remember Robin Hunicki spoke at RDC. I think 2019 was when Robin Hunicki spoke, who worked on Journey, and she has a really great framework for games, really simplistic and reductive and brilliant, which I believe is mechanics, dynamics, aesthetics, mechanics, dynamics, I think is what it is, right? The game has to look good, the game has to feel good mechanically, and the game has to deliver ongoing new reasons to play it, which is really what progression is about. And I think Journey, was the master on, if you look at those three in a little capsule, a little 2.5 hour, journey. That game had an incredible art style that was immediately transfixing. It felt incredible when you get up in the air and when you're skiing, kind of sliding on the sand dunes. And then over the course of the game, you're constantly being surprised and trying to and asking yourself what's going to happen next. And so I think that game is really brilliant in its simplicity and its entertainment value.
So the obvious answer for me would appear to be Call of Duty, but it's actually not the answer. In fact, I kind of don't like playing Call of Duty, surprisingly. Whenever I play Call of Duty, I see a lot of design choices that I would have done differently. It leads to a bit of frustration with the game developers or maybe the management that influence them to make certain monetization practices, or even okay, there's some very basic bugs that they're overlooking, or they're making this gameplay very stiff and can't really do a lot with it. That's how I feel about Call of Duty. The game that I really enjoy is World of Warships. It's like a ship game where you shoot things across the map, but the underlying thing that I like about it is it feels like chess. So I think the real game that I really enjoy is chess. And I like it when games you can apply a chess mentality to them and do very well from a strategic and tactical level, which means there's a high level approach to the game, the grand strategy sort of approach. And then there's the mechanical skill you can apply through the form of tactics, or outplaying, outmaneuvering your enemy. This can be applied even in first-person shooter games, so it's almost in any sort of game that you can apply the chess mindset that I really enjoy.
And that easy to learn the rules, but hard to master the gameplay.
Yes,
Yeah.
I like a high skill curve game.
Very cool. All right, thank you, everybody. Got another one for you. Is a rebirth or prestige system that allows you to unlock certain areas or upgrades or boosts good for player engagement and retention? It's a pretty common Roblox progression mechanic, right?
Yeah, I'd like to think so. I mean, it just comes back to audience, and for us, I think it works pretty well. Gives you something else besides just the run around green hill open zone. It gives you a midterm to possibly long term, depending on how far out you want to go. Goal.
Yeah, that's a feature I don't have in my game, and it's been asked about a lot. Aesthetically, I don't really prefer it. It feels just reusing the same, but you get to do it again. At the same time, the audience is super receptive to it. Same with other systems that are purely numbers based, which I also don't like. I generally like to pair any numbers increase with some kind of improvement, right? Whether that's how you play the game, what weapons you have available, what skills you have available. Something needs to be a little bit different every time a number goes up. But a lot of games don't. The number going up is the game. And I think that's a little bit unique to the Roblox platform. So it has been a learning experience for me coming from traditional gaming. And Rebirth is another one that I'm resistant, but I'm open to being convinced otherwise.
I think the Rebirth or / prestige system works very well for simulator games where you've unlocked the entire chain of stuff and now you want to restart and you get some emblem or something. And Call of Duty back then also used to do a prestige system. Back in Modern Warfare 2, it was one of this shiny thing that you can do. But the market back then is very different. So Call of Duty, when you published it, shipped it, the content in that game is fixed. You might have DLCs, but otherwise it is done. So when you get to rank level 65, which is the level cap in Modern Warfare 2, you're done. There's no more weapons that are being added. The developers are not going to work on this game as much other than making it run. You want to keep doing something, well, the only choice you have is sort of the prestige system. So you can go back and experience the joy of unlocking all of the weapons from rank 1 and then get a tag for that progress. But now Call of Duty has moved away from this model because they discovered that live ops and just a live service model is so much more profitable and much more easy to maintain. So their current game, big game, is Warzone, and they would not try to attempt any prestige system because it would be a massive headache to try to reset all of their like items and then make players unlock them when they've spent money on those microtransactions, which is not a thing that existed back in like 2010s and Modern Warfare 2. It's like this is a very new model and it kind of destroys the prestiging and resetting your progress model.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Another question. Do you see any common issues with how progression is implemented in Roblox games?
I don't mean to punt, but like Roblox games are just too diverse, I think, to, I mean, there's games like, the biggest game on the platform, unseatably huge is Brookhaven, right? And I think Brookhaven arguably has no kind of classic progression from a gameplay standpoint, right? It's all immersive and emergent and truly imagination driven in a lot of ways, where the next game down the list usually is Blox Fruits, which is a completely progression driven quantitative role-playing game. And so Roblox games in general really run the spectrum. I will say that I think one of the things we see at GameFam, Roblox native developers and indie developers struggling with the most is long-term roadmap planning. And long-term roadmap planning is really, really difficult. And we see a lot of developers who have great games kind of over the long run just lose interest in continuing to service some really great games because they can't figure out how to keep progression going and keep it interesting in the long term. And it's much easier to say, well, I'll just make a whole new game sometimes. And that's something that we've gotten really good at, is games do have a life cycle, right? But we have gotten really good at extending that life cycle for 1, 2, 3 years on linear games like Sonic Speed Simulator. We have a plan, and we ship that game with far too little content because we made that game in under 3 months to time it with the movie. But we shipped, we have a huge plan to add content for years to that game. We're working very closely with Sega. We're aligning with the franchise calendar. Another great example of this is what we've been doing in Military Tycoon, right? Most Tycoon games that are linear, or Car Dealership Tycoon, both GameFam games, games that are linear like that, where you build something and then you're done building it, it's hard to figure out new ways to keep those games at scale, keep those games in the top 25 earning games. We have gotten really deep into the game design around Tycoons, for example, and figured out how to keep new ways to progress in a genre that historically has a very specific cap on progression. And that's something that guys like Derek, study up on and observe and analyze other games. And we're constantly trying to increase and level up our skills in that area as a company.
Anyone else have any thoughts on this one?
I can only speak for the very narrow genre of first-person shooters. A common mistake I see on upcoming Roblox shooters is they either don't have enough content or weapons, or their content is very spread out. We always want to make sure that you unlock things much more quickly early on and then slowly space it out later on, because by that point, they're not really worried about progression. They're already hooked into your game, so you don't have to worry about that. If you don't have anything new early on, players will not retain as easily. And they will also feel like, oh, this is unfair. It's like all these newer other players have better weapons. If you keep feeding them new weapons, then they get to try them out and then see what their play style is, and they'll feel like, oh, I can actually do very well with this. So now I don't have to worry about all these other players with their fancy guns. I'm actually enjoying the game. And so you want that sort of like an exponential curve in progression in terms of requirements. You also want like or at least for our game, we want to have parallel paths for progression. You don't want like a linear one, just so you can be unlocking multiple types of weapons when you haven't really figured out what type of gun you enjoy. Maybe you enjoy like a close range submachine gun, so you want to be able to unlock a few of those. But maybe you try out your first sniper rifle and you realize, oh, I'm actually really good at shooting from long range, and it's like you kind of want to give them a sandbox to play with different classes before you hone them into like a linear long path.
Such an important point about how your progression system feels and how that motivates the player. Like, how do you go about figuring out if your progression feels good for your new players?
Gotta play the game.
Play test a lot.
Play the game. Gotta play the game. And I mean, we were really focused on the first, hour of Sonic to make sure players got involved. And I mean, we played it and played it and played it. And we timed things and we talked to each other. And, it's usually having more than one person is really helpful because every gamer's got their own point of view on how things feel, right? And when a group of smart and passionate gamers all can kind of agree, like this feels pretty good, we kind of say at Game Fam, like that's about as good as you can do. Like the rest is like up to the Roblox gods to decide if players are going to like it. But up on Mount Robloxia, looking down on all of us.
Yeah, so true. All right. If you could have any feature that could support your development journey on the platform right now, what would it be?
I have one. Multiple materials and colorable textures on meshes. Because right now, if you want a different color of something that has a texture, like a mesh with a texture, you need to actually upload the whole texture, as opposed to being able to do a white one and color it. That is a lot of work for a lot of the assets that I have, for example. And then multiple materials on the same mesh.
I mean, what excites us right now, I think we're having a lot of success bringing the features and graphics to life that are possible within Roblox's, client and app, right? Like we're not going to ask Roblox to all of a sudden allow for, a huge amount of additional performance or anything like that, because, I think we all want Roblox to have better and better performance with better and better graphical capabilities so that we can continue to push our creativity. I think that all goes without saying. I think for us, and I don't know if Derek feels differently, but one thing that would be incredible would be more ways to market our games directly to the audience. Like we are crushing it on Twitter for Sonic Speed Simulator. I mean, we have update posts that have gotten over 20,000 likes. I mean, I haven't seen, we follow a lot of the big developers' Twitter accounts. And when you're posting a teaser for an update that gets 20,000 likes for a Roblox game on Twitter, like that is a lot of likes. We had this great update last week where we put in a different version of Metal Sonic. So now we've got Sonic, we've got Metal Sonic, and then we've got Mach 3 Metal Sonic. And we did like the meme from Spider-Man where like they're all pointing at each other. And it was hilarious. I think it got a few thousand likes, and we posted late in the day because we came up with it like on the spot and we like made it right away. And we'd love to be able to get that in front of the Roblox community directly on Roblox someday, to make GIFs, to make video ads. We love entertaining our audience, not just in the game, but around the game as well. So we're really excited for more marketing and community management tools to come online.
So with the first person shooter, we're constantly hitting like technical limitations of Roblox. And one of the things we want to focus on is immersion. You want the guns to feel really realistic, and you need good effects and rendering to do that. One thing that we have never been able to do because of what Roblox supports or what they don't support is a dual rendering system with scopes. the high level feature request would be to expand on camera functionality, be able to have a second camera that can render the map from a different angle, and you can kind of like draw another screen. You can do this in Unity or other game engines very easily, but in Roblox, there's only one camera, one viewport frame. And it kind of limits a lot on what we can do. Like we can't just create a mini map by doing a top-down view of your current map and just drawing it in like a corner on your screen, which would be very convenient. Right now, we have this object called viewport frames, which is sort of a hack in the GUI object space. It basically requires you to clone your entire map and then drop it into the viewport frame, and then it renders that viewport frame separately, and it's not very performant. And performance is one of the biggest barriers for a first-person shooter game. You need all the frames you can get because responsiveness is key in a reactive competitive game. And Roblox, some people on Roblox are playing on like less expensive hardware, so if they're getting less than 60 frames per second, their screen's gonna look a little choppy, and if someone's shooting them, they're not gonna see that in time. That's why we can't just like do these viewport frame hacks with mini maps or like drawing the entire map on your scope so that you can have like a zoomed in effect in the middle, and then the surrounding effect is like a slightly different zooms, sort of like how a real scope would work. It'd be nice if we can have more rendering functionality.
More polygons, more quickly, please, Roblox. Thank you so much.
Fair enough. Well, thank you all for the feature suggestions. I'm sure the producers on the call are taking notes. We have time for just one more question. How do you go about balancing a progression system? What are some things you need to consider?
I mean, if anyone here knew the answer to that, they'd already be owning their own island.
I was gonna say with great
Yeah.
pain, yes.
Yeah.
Balancing
I mean,
progression
yeah,
is the
yeah.
hardest thing. It's the hardest thing there is, and you know, that's what companies like EA Mobile and Zynga, you know, have whole teams of people with, you know, statistics degrees doing. You know, I think watching, you know, putting in some analytics and trying to understand where players are getting to in the game and where players are dropping out of the game, and using that data to inform, you know, if people are moving through the game too slowly or too quickly, and then just listening to the community. There is no easy answer to progression balancing in my experience, but if anyone has one, please DM me. To hear it, and I'll pay you for the answers as well.
Yeah, I think analytics is the only right answer.
Yeah.
Everything else is gut feeling and, you know, may or may not be right. It's 50-50. Like you really need a strong component of reporting the right events and having the right tools to produce the right reports and having the right people to come up with actionable items based on those reports. So it's a whole chain, it's a whole team. But I think that's the only way to do objectively right. I do it gut feeling, and you know, I have certain archetypes of players in my community that I test with, and then look at their analytics, because I don't have that whole structure in place.
I had the bad signal light. I was tapped on the shoulder that we were talking about balance. And given my life in Excel, it's not a perfect science, as everyone says. It can look like a perfect science if you look over my shoulder at my Excel sheet. It all looks nice, but I'm here to tell you that you make it look nice in Excel and then you put it in your game and it plays like garbage. And then you just have to continue to play. I think like high level steps for me, you start with the goals of yourself and your team. Then you put some numbers on a piece of paper. You put it in your game and your team tells you how terrible it feels. And then you just continue to tweak and tighten the bolts and tighten the bolts. And then you put it in front of your players and they tell you that your entire team is wrong and it plays terribly. And then you continue to tighten the bolts and tighten the bolts. And then you have analytics, right? As everybody was saying here. And it's just ultimately an iterative process. There's never a perfect balance, but you're always trying to move ever closer to it over time. So
if there's something concrete that I would offer as advice, is what you said just now, the ability to tweak bolts and pull on levers, like have your systems easily, clearly exposed, well documented. That I feel is like a big chunk of the battle, like being able to act upon your instincts very easily and see it in the game very quickly without everything kind of breaking apart or having unintended consequences or knock-on effects or things like this. And that has to start at the beginning of your systems design. You cannot untangle a spaghetti ball of interconnected values or formulas after the fact. It's very, very painful. So yeah, think about that. That is definitely something tangible that you can do to help this iterative process.
Yeah, exactly. And as a public service announcement, for first timers balancing a system, you're probably looking at games and saying, why isn't mine playing as well as theirs? Well, theirs is like V17 of that system, right? None of us get it perfect on the first time. So it's just about patience and iteration. You'll get there eventually.
Right. Well, it looks like that is all the time we have. So thank you all for attending and asking such great questions. Dan, do you want to wrap up and then toss it back to me?
Well, I think you covered a lot of it. Thanks to our panel. There was some amazing engagement today, awesome questions asked by the audience. And hopefully for those that are watching, you have a broader picture of, first of all, why progression is important and the ways to do it. So thanks again, Derek and Joe from the Sonic Speed Simulator team. Thanks for engaging with us today and sharing your knowledge. Harrison, legendary Phantom Forces game developer. Thanks for joining us. And Golem, I think we share our favorite genre together. So it was awesome jamming on progression with you as well. So thank you again.
Awesome. Thank you.
Today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
So it looks like that is all the time that we have. Thank you to our panelists and all of our questions from the audience. They were fantastic. For everyone who is watching on YouTube, thank you for tuning in. Drop your questions and your comments below. We would love to hear from you. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the Roblox Developer Relations YouTube channel because more level up content is on the way.